and get onto onto the webinar?
It was, I wasn't sure at first, and then because it said starting in like 6 minutes, and I had to click on that little clock, and then it let me in.
Oh yeah, yeah, that was the only thing. I noticed that too. I was like, it's not that clear. It doesn't.
Yeah, it wasn't
like
clear on how to actually get in it.
Right, exactly. Hopefully, Mr. Sheldall will be able to get in as well. Well, I think we can, it's 11 o'clock, it's time. We'll go ahead and start, and hopefully Mr. Sheldall will be able to join us. Like to welcome everyone to Paving a Way to Equity. I'm honored to be hosting today's webinar and subsequent Q&A with leaders in education and advocates for equity, diversity, and inclusion. We do have Dr. Elizabeth Washington with us today, and we hope that James Sheldall will be able to join us at some point in the webinar as well. Thank you, Dr. Washington, for your tireless work to meet both the needs of your students and your school community.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here.
TeleTeachers' goal in hosting these webinars is to drive the most relevant, actionable information sharing in areas that are of particular interest and importance to all of your roles. TeleTeachers is a special education technology company that connects school districts with the certified special education teachers and therapists to be the total solution provider for all your special education needs. We provide a platform that enables educators to deliver and document high quality special education instruction easier. I am Erin Raffel. I'm the content manager for TeleTeachers, and it's my job to ensure that we're constantly striving to be conversation leaders and thought provokers in all relevant areas of education. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to formally introduce Dr. Washington. Dr. Elizabeth Washington is the Director of Special Services, at Waynesville School District, R6 in Waynesville, Missouri. She's a born and bred Californian hailing from San Jose. Dr. Washington received her doctorate in educational leadership in 2016. She's been a special education administrator for the last 12 years, as well as the diversity officer. Previous to being in education, Dr. Washington was a federal corrections officer at a federal prison with the collateral duty of affirmative action manager. She has been married for 16 years and has 8 children, of which 4 are adopted. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much for the introduction. I appreciate it.
That's amazing. Wow, 8 children. You must be a very busy woman.
Yeah, they keep me pretty busy. They
Right.
they outnumber my husband and I, but we, with structures in place, we keep things pretty organized.
I see, I bet. Um, and also, hopefully, if Mr. Sheldall is able to join us throughout the webinar, Jamie's a proud superintendent of Yuma Elementary School District number 1 in Yuma, Arizona. He has enjoyed a 34-year career in Yuma, during which time he taught middle school and high school English and served as a principal and associate superintendent in the Yuma Union High School District. He has been in his current position since 2016. Jamie is committed to including students with special needs with their typical peers to the greatest extent possible. District number 1 focuses on educating the whole child, emphasizing art, music, and PE, including a strong unified sports program and an inclusive environment. He has been married to Renee, who is also an educator, for 31 years, and they have 3 adult children. All right, as we move through the presentation today, please put any questions that you may have into the chat, and we will get those answered. And now, with great excitement for the learnings ahead, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Washington.
Okay, so what I really want to talk about and what I've worked with our school district on so far is understanding implicit bias and really what educators should know about that. And really even the most well-intentioned person may have implicit bias without even knowing it. And so I reference lots of materials, but I kind of wanted to talk about our journey with diversity and steps that we've taken here at Waynesville. We've started this journey about a year ago, and I think it's important for any district as you look to putting diversity training into place. It's really important to do your research and have a good plan in place before moving forward. So here's advice that I want to give to everyone, just as I've learned the process. I haven't had direct training with diversity. My experiences have been being a multiracial person myself, having a diverse family, working with diverse students. So that's been, my experience. And looks like my co-host is here joining in.
Great to have you, Mr. Sheldall. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Please
And
continue.
so so what I thought I would do is share my journey, and then he could share his journey as well, and kind of just our work as we try to be more inclusive with all of our students. So my role, so here in Waynesville, we have a very diverse student population. We're about 70% military impacted. 16% of our students have special needs. And so really it's trying to create an environment of inclusion and belonging for all of our students. Well, that comes with training of our staff, training with our parents, working to create that inclusive environment. So our journey was, I was kind of tasked then as the diversity officer for the district of what is it going to look like and what is it going to take. So I reached out to universities, I reached out to people who were diversity officers at other school districts to say, what's our first step? So really my first step was finding out where the resources are, reaching out to them and developing a 4-year diversity plan of where we're at now and where do we want to be. So at our district, we have a district level diversity committee, and that has administration on there, parents are on there, community members on there, and it really drives our process. So at the district diversity team level, we look at what do we want to implement for the school year? Are we on track? And then each building in our district has a building level diversity team, and that has different stakeholders in that building involved. If parents are on there, different businesses are on there, and they kind of drive what are we going to do at the building level? And then there's a member of each of those teams who are on the district diversity team, and they share what we're doing at the buildings. And then we look at, okay, what do we need now to move forward? Did you want to share with kind of how your district's laid out as far as diversity?
Are you talking to me?
Yes. Sorry.
Yes. Well, we're in Arizona,
Mhm.
so we're not real heavily staffed at the district level, but we don't have any formal diversity programs, but we believe in strongly, and since I've become the superintendent, really to a person, our principals believe in inclusion for students with special needs across the board. So that's just the default position for us. We've, in the last 5 years, excuse me, we've had very few parents bring concerns to us regarding inclusion, regarding the opportunities that their children have. So we've been able to kind of school by school. We're a school district that has mostly small neighborhood elementary schools. So the principal gets to know the people in the neighborhood, and over time has been able to build trust and in the community. And just that trust, I think, really, which almost comes one conversation at a time with the building principal and our parents, is the most vital part of our program, I believe. I just fielded an email on Friday from a parent who has a student who in kindergarten 2 years ago had not been identified as having special needs, but since has, and now and has moved out of our attendance area, but wants to open enroll back into our attendance area, into one of our schools. So obviously we're going to do everything we can to accommodate that open enrollment. And I think that's just one example of the trust that we've built with our parents over time, to put in place a system that's inclusive and that values the child, and also values the perspective of the parent in the process.
It sounds very similar to our goals.
And I apologize. May I call you Jamie?
Jamie is what I go by. Yes.
Okay, great. I apologize. I did introduce you at the beginning, so everyone knows your background and what school district you're coming from. And so I just wanted to let you know we did kind of run through that. So you're already in.
Okay. I was just kind of hoping to share my own personal journey when it comes to inclusion. I'm maybe a little older than some of the folks on the call, but when I was a kid growing up in small town Midwest, students who had severe special needs didn't even go to school. And even up until I started teaching in 1987, I taught for 12 years in junior high and high school. And the fact is that even in that era, special education was more about a place and a group of people who taught in that place. The inclusion was just really lacking, and it was challenging when I became a building administrator. I was the high school district. I became a building administrator in the high school district, and we still had magnet programs. So students with specific disabilities, if it was an SLD situation, they were served at their home school. But if there were a behavioral issue, if there were other students were more significantly impacted, then they were placed at a different school. And I'm almost embarrassed to say, although I try to tell this story as often as possible, when I came into building administration, I was at a school that didn't have any of the magnet programs, placement programs that involved where students had significant behavioral challenges. And the kind of the unwritten and unspoken mission was when students with significant disabilities were identified, and then it was to try to get them placed somewhere else. And that was at the time, I didn't think a whole lot of it because it was just the way it had been done. And about 3 or 4 years later, I was, by the superintendent, I was moved to one of the schools that was had one of the magnet programs. To give you an idea, our special ed department at the school where I moved had 34 employees. We had 34 people working in the special education department at this one high school. And the thing that amazed me, not only was the professionalism and the just the attitudes of the teachers and the staff, but also the students, the typical students on campus. It hadn't occurred to me that I had never seen, I guess I should say, in my experience, the kind of just inclusion and the degree to which the typical peers, the typical students in the school were enriched by their interaction with and their involvement with the students, with their special needs peers. And it was just really an eye-opener for me. So a couple years later, I had the good fortune to be the first principal at a brand new high school. And that coincided with a new superintendent who had a strong belief in inclusion. And our new, at that time, our commitment was that to the greatest extent possible, every student should be able to be served at their home school. We had obviously big high schools, so we were able to to facilitate programs and staffing and support to where, regardless of a student's disability, almost without exception, those students were able to be served at their home campus with their home peers and the kids they live in the neighborhood with. And I think that was a big development in my own personal journey and belief system. And when that happened, every school got to benefit from the rich, diverse community. And every school got to make plans and make commitments to providing students with what they need. And so we started a PE Buddies, we started a co-teaching model, and we started our special needs teachers, our teachers in our ESS department started pushing into the classroom, serving special needs students, our students with special needs in the classroom with their typical peers, to the point where it became really almost difficult to discern sometimes who the content area teacher was and who the special education teacher was. So when I became a superintendent at District 1, I had the benefit of that 29-year evolution in not only my own belief system, but my own belief system being driven by the developments that we've made in education regarding serving our students with special needs. So that's kind of my journey. And then when I got to District 1, my first position that I hired was a director of exceptional student services. And we hired Shanna Roof, who's on this call, and she had a strong belief and strong commitment to inclusion for every student. And from that point on, any building administrators who still maybe maintain the old belief system either were able to come on board, or maybe they decided that maybe that wasn't the best place for them anymore.
That is a really good insight into kind of how you stepped into what your role is now, and what you carried forward into that. Dr. Washington, do you want to go a little bit more into your experience?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And I can relate to a lot of what Jamie was sharing about his journey. You know, I've had a similar journey, and like when I talked about understanding implicit biases, just making sure that all of our students feel like they're included. That's always my goal. You know, I go about it in my career. I know you mentioned at the beginning that I have 8 children, and 7 of my children have IEPs, and one of my sons who was special needs actually passed away. But through his life, we were able to develop 2 case studies about his rare disorder, and that helped future parents who didn't have that information. So I'm very passionate about it as a mom of children with special needs, in my own family background, of making sure that we have a very inclusive environment. So that's my goal. And as we develop our comprehensive school improvement plan, our focus next year is to make sure that we have equitable classrooms across the district, and train teachers in equitable practices. And kind of I talked about when I dived into understanding implicit biases, it was being aware of our own implicit biases, so we're able to kind of check those at the door and work with any and every student who come through our doors. Some things that training we've done with our teachers, and it is free if anyone would like to do it. There's an implicit association test, the IAT, that is put out. So every one of our educators went through. I said, this is personal to you. I want you to go through this to kind of see what your own, you know, biases are that you may not even be aware of, but without being aware of those can unconsciously impact decisions we make, whether it be discipline, you know, changes in the classroom. But of course, that's their own personal information. I always tell them, I'm not trying to change any belief system, but we are an inclusive school, so our practices have to be equitable. So every educator in our district went through that, and understanding what their biases were, and then how to overcome those. So then we work at, okay, one way to kind of overcome that is to expose themselves to things that they may have been unconsciously implicit bias against. And like Jamie said, you're not going to go into any classroom and not have a student with special needs, because our goal is a majority of our students with special needs are educated right in the regular ed classroom. A student may qualify for special education, and that doesn't mean, you know, they go to a separate setting. I tell the teacher they're still going to be in your classroom, but now, you know, they're going to have the IEP that we follow to make sure that they are making progress. You know, we want our students who don't have disabilities to learn from our students who have disabilities, and, you know, learn from them as we move forward. So I think, you know, when we really look at implicit bias, I had teachers tell me, you know, I don't have any implicit biases, you know, I accept all. And externally, I feel like as educators, we do, because we want all of our students to learn. But when you look at those unconscious things that we're not aware of, that's why I think you have to do some of these association tests, or really kind of, you know, unpeel the layers of, you know, do I have this because of my upbringing? Do I think a certain way? Have I, you know, there's stereotypes I have and don't even realize it. Because once then you tap into that, then you can really look at, okay, how do I make sure that my practices are equitable, and this unconscious behavior doesn't, you know, get into my conscious behavior. So that's been our journey as we go through the inclusive practices. So kind of what I was saying earlier is it's ongoing. You know, it's not like, okay, we've learned this and now we're done with, you know, diversity training or, you know, equitable practices. No, it's ongoing. And as new research comes out, you know, we go through that and look at how to incorporate that in the classroom. So that's why I think it's important, if you're a district or an educator who's like, okay, what's step one? I think definitely step one is being on this, webinar, but then looking at your community. Is there anyone I can team up with, that is, well trained in this area, and can I bring them into my district to do a training, be it at the administration level, at the building level. But really for us, it was doing that, but also having those building level teams and then the district level team to kind of monitor the progress, making diversity a part of our comprehensive school improvement plan, because we're showing that, we want, and that's all areas of diversity. We want our students to feel like, they're coming to a place where they feel like they belong. And then, but that takes, working from the top down, like Jamie says, superintendent charging his district with, this is how we do things here. This is our mindset. That mindset of every student belongs, and we're going to make sure that they're included with everything that we do. So having that plan of action for diversity, using resources like Missouri State University is a big university close to us. They actually have a diversity office where I pull in those resources and those trainers. Once I know what I know, and it's limited to my own experiences, and they can bring in then that third party perspective. And sometimes that's not as threatening to staff, as we talk about, their own personal experiences, to have that third party come in and do some of those trainings to make sure that it gets back down to the classroom level.
Absolutely. And Dr. Washington, you started talking about this and you're kind of going into it a little bit, but specifically culturally responsive teaching for the 2021-2022 school year, and best practices. What does this look like for you going into the next school year?
Yeah, and that's very important. And we've really been a lot of our teachers, when they went through their teacher preparation programs, they never had a course on diversity, or they hadn't been exposed to, people who don't look like them or act like them. And so I know some of the newer programs, like at Missouri State University, they do have a course, and it's one of the trainers. But for them understanding, culturally, responsiveness, and basically we look at anti-racist teaching across the board, and what does that look like, and we've done training with our teachers on understanding that and how to put some of those practices in the classroom. So this year we had diversity trainings for our admin every month, and then our teachers, we've had 3 trainings a year on some of those culturally responsive teaching practices. And then feedback, like I would give the teacher some practices and I say, okay, try this in your classroom, and then give me feedback on, how did it go? And then we also got student feedback. And it was interesting because a lot of the students, they were ready, like some of the discussions, they were ready to have those discussions, but we hadn't trained the teacher yet on how to respond to some of those discussions. So we didn't want to put them, in an area where they felt uncomfortable. But, so really working with the teachers. So if a student asks this question, here's a way to respond to it, to guide those discussions, because we want our students having those discussions, but we want the teachers to feel qualified to continue those discussions. So our trainings involve the teachers, it's involved the counselors. Really, our building level diversity teams have guided a lot of those practices. So for us, it's been, the ongoing training for the teacher, and then we've done diversity lessons with our students. So every quarter, our elementary and secondary diversity curriculum teams that we created, they kind of choose an item or topic then for our students to learn about and discuss. It's about different areas, just whatever we feel like, the students are wanting to talk about, to really have those discussions all the way down to our preschool level. There's a book, Let's Talk About Race, and it's appropriate for those like the preschool through 2nd grade level, about having those discussions about race, and then there's articles about special education and talking about students with disabilities. Some of our older students who have disabilities had said, hey, I'd love to share of what it's like to have autism, or we have a student who has Down syndrome, and sharing that. So one way we've engaged students is we've had, we're the Tigers here in Waynesville, so we call them Tiger Tough Talks. And we invite students who want to share about their experiences in an open forum. We've invited them to do that, and those have went very well. So something, if you're thinking about doing with your district, is the diversity forum. So students share, one student shared what it was like having a sister with Down syndrome, and always feeling like, you know, advocating for her sister in, you know, in high school, and her sister is one of our cheerleaders, and you know, guiding her. And she's like, it was so great. I thought my sister with Down syndrome would never get to cheer with me, and here she is cheering right along beside me, and you know, those experiences. So students got to share their experiences with, you know, diversity and their school experience, and you know, what were the takeaways of what can we do as educators then to help experiences of future students. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that you can put in place. My advice is don't do everything at once. Obviously, I always say, you know, we're taking baby steps here. We're putting in, you know, trainings and processes, and we have a goal of where, you know, we want to be. Like the end of next school year, we want you know, equitable classrooms across the board, and I'm feeling like we're getting there. But it is a process, and sometimes it can be frustrating because you want to be farther than you are. But with a really good plan in place, you can get there.
I think that is a good point to make. Baby steps, can't do it all at once, but it's about taking those first steps. And kind of along those lines, Jamie, along the lines of best practices, where do you start with creating that culture of inclusion within your school community?
Well, we're an AVID school district. I don't know if you're familiar with AVID, but there are 4 domains within AVID, and one of them is culture. And that's, so all of our schools have been trained in AVID. We have ongoing training, we have path training, we do summer institute, and the culture piece, which is a culture of inclusion, is infused. It's a lens through which all decisions are made. And there is a strand within AVID called culturally responsive teaching, and so we send groups of teachers to that strand every year, and then they come back and they can, you know, they can help be leaders on their campus as far as working with their fellow teachers. We do a pretty strong PLC model. I mean, PLCs could always get better, but you know, our teachers work in teams, and they plan together. They you know, they grade together, they look at data together, they look at interventions together. So they being able to infuse not only the lens, the cultural lens of inclusion in the decision making at the building level, but also at the PLC level, and then being able to get a critical number of people trained in those strategies, and then being able to have that element be a key part in the PLCs. That's pretty much our strategy.
And how do you ensure your educators get that support and collaboration that they need in order to really submerge themselves in this inclusion work?
It's just a top priority. You know, we meet with our principals, and we make sure that our principals have very intentionally time set aside for not only for PLCs, but also that they set time aside to where either they or an instructional coach can be part of the meeting, and ensure that you know, that it's efficient and effective, and that you know, sometimes those meetings can kind of go off on tangents. So you kind of want to make sure that there's people who can be part of it, who kind of keep things focused. So it's just it's a district expectation that and it almost sounds top down to say it's a district expectation. Our principals are completely committed to that collaborative process, not only with their teachers, but with students in the classroom. Student collaboration has been one of our top instructional goals for the 3 years now running. And so that whole collaborative piece, both culturally and instructionally, is at the core. So I don't want to sound like I came in and implemented this set of priorities and made the principals do it. The fact is, it was the other way around. The principals see the value of collaboration. They see the value of embedding the belief system and the knowledge in, you know, at the teacher level with those teams. And it's pretty easy to support a group of principals when, you know, when they're bringing that focus to you and just asking you to support it.
Have either of you hired a equity and diversity director in your school district? And if so, or if not, do you believe that that's necessary to institute these policies?
Well, I would love to hire one. So we have not, but so for my district, it's fallen under my duties at you know, to do. But I think as it evolves, I definitely see the need as we get into more of our plans of action and things that we want to do. Right now, like I said, I'm kind of overseeing our building principals are doing an amazing job of then doing the trainings within their buildings and working with their staff. And then I try to bring in, you know, outside people as well to do trainings. And I try to go to workshops myself. So I can make sure that we are doing culturally responsive teaching and practices. So right now I am the diversity officer for the district, but no, we have not yet hired one.
So we haven't, and I kind of go back and forth on this topic. I know I'm familiar with some, you know, much larger districts that do have an equity and diversity position at the district level, and I think on the one hand, I think, you know, if that's a value and it's embedded in the district culture, then maybe pulling it out and highlighting it as something specific. Sometimes that has the effect of, like I said, with my early career experience with special education, of saying, well, we've got somebody who does that now, so we don't need to necessarily do that. On the other hand, I think it's important, and I've had during the course of this last year, especially, conversation with community members about the concept of systemic racism, which is pretty significantly misunderstood concept. So trying to explain, you know, what it means that we need to be constantly evaluating our systems, not only for inputs but also for outcomes. And if we have outcomes that are inherently inequitable, we need to evaluate that system. So I think that's a big job, and I think that school districts definitely could benefit from somebody who, first of all, monitors that data, can bring it to the team to identify whether, you know, what system potentially is producing the inequitable results, and then, you know, go to, you know, we can put remedies in place, training in place, and then somebody to go and actually intentionally monitor that. I think that could definitely benefit a district, but I think you run the risk sometimes when you identify that as an office, then that becomes somebody else's job. So I'm kind of going back, I go back and forth on that one.
And that's a good point. It's a very good point. You want everyone to be able to be instituting these practices and not just one person. So that's a good point to bring up. If we could kind of go into a little bit more on curriculum as regards to equity, just out of curiosity, there's kind of a idea that standardized testing with in regards to equity, that does it make sense in order to assess where students are right now academically, or does this become a socioeconomic issue where some kids might have the means to get extra help during the pandemic? Does this foster inequity?
I'm not of two minds on this. I think high stakes standardized testing is not just inequitable, it's also inefficient, and it's I think it's politically driven. I don't think it's academically driven. A lot of the elements within the reporting on the standardized testing kind of takes the moral high ground by identifying subgroups and ensuring in Arizona, at least, providing bonus points for the district based on different subgroups and things. But the fact is, we don't get the results for months. And the teachers who have the students, by the time they get the results, they're in a different class. They're with a different teacher. It's a different makeup. The fact is, we need to re-professionalize the profession of teaching, in my opinion. And I told this story to a business group last week on Arbor Day. We had 2 of our schools had about 60 trees donated, and the kids went out and got to participate in planting, and they they learned about the trees. They had about 6, each school had about 6 different varieties. We had some people from the community who came in and helped, and some arborists and other community people. The sad thing is that day was bookended by the Arizona AZM2 testing. So all they did the rest of that week was test. And this is 2 schools that are in the 90% free and reduced lunch, and 90% plus, in fact, even 99%, one school Hispanic. And what if that had been a project that's a hands-on project for kids, the kids to be able to learn the water cycle as it applies to their trees, do some research about urban deserts and how planting trees can benefit the environment, write stories about the trees, monitor the data on the tree growth and the watering and so on. I mean, there's so much real world learning that can take place. And then what if the teachers then were trusted to evaluate the students' work and evaluate their learning, and then the next day that team of teachers could make decisions based on based on their learning. It's just the gap. I mean, we can get into the bias about the testing, which is significant, but just from a practical standpoint, the gap between the tests, first of all, the relevance of the test, second of all, the gap between the test and the test results being made available, make it almost unusable for any kind of an instructional or learning centered value. It's strictly a way to grade schools.
No, I agree completely with that as well. I mean, really, how relevant is it? And missing out on those opportunities to have the real world learning, and then focusing on it. So it says nothing about the relationships the students have with teachers. I mean, there's so many other variables that you can look at. I mean, what is it really telling us? And by the time we get the data, like Jamie said, most of the students they're on with another teacher. So how can we actually then use that data in classrooms when there's so many other pieces of data we have available to guide learning. Teachers collect data all the time on their their students in the classroom. They gauge their their emotional well-being. Do they come to school hungry? Do they need a snack? I mean, just building that relationship and that comfort zone. There's so many other things. So I agree with him completely on that.
That kind of really nicely segues into the next kind of curriculum question that I was have for both of you. Can you talk, and we have time for probably one more question. Can you tell us how grading procedures, like a more standards-based grading system, can foster equity as opposed to, so the students are focused more on a journey of learning as opposed to just giving them a grade?
So for us, that's really been a push for us, and we are fully standards-based graded for our preschool up through 6th grade. Now 7th through 12th grade, it's still letter grades, just because it's been really difficult because a lot of other high schools do letter grades. So as students move in and out, and since we're 70% military impacted, you know, they're kind of like, you know, what's this when a student transfers out? We've worked really hard though on being standards-based graded for preschool through 6th grade. And I, you know, as you know, like if a student has an A, what does that mean? Because there's a lot of subjectivity in that. You know, now I can pull any standard and tell you exactly where the student is at, if they're proficient, if they're approaching proficiency, and what do we need to focus on in order for that student to gain proficiency in that standard. We do standards-based grading for all of our special ed students also in those grades. I can track progress then for our special ed students on which standards we're progressing on and which ones we're not, and you know, what strategies do we need to focus on. And that those are conversations. We're also a PLC school that our teachers have every Wednesday morning as a late start Wednesday, of really looking at the standard, where the students are at, you know, based off of formative assessments or a summative assessment that we've done to say, okay, are they making progress? And that way, you know, at any given time, we know where our students are at. You know, we don't need the, you know, the once a year statewide testing to tell us that. We know where our students at with standards. And what we need to focus on, you know, as a school district. So we have, like I said, we're looking at different approaches for 7th grade and up. We're just not standards-based graded yet for those grades.
I would say that our setup is very similar, and I think, you know, the PLC model is the greatest calibrator. You know, if you've got a good tight PLC model in your school, and teachers are constantly reflecting on, you know, what is it the kids need to know, and how do we know that they know it, and we have the standards as a foundation, you know, and a curriculum calendar, then then you know, trying to translate all that learning and all the evidence of learning into an A, B, C, D, or F, really it's a huge leap on the ladder of abstraction, right? I mean, what does that really mean? And so K through 5, I'd say we're really strong in that area. And like Dr. Washington said, once we get into, you know, we're just a K-8 district, but our middle school, we have some of the same challenges that we had when I was in the high school district, where trying to calibrate practices, not only grading practices, but also input practices. You know, how many assignments is a teacher going to assign every week? How did they weight a test versus a quiz versus an assignment? All those decisions can really impact grading. You know, a kid might be able to perform the same way from a standards-based and maybe get an A in one teacher's class, maybe get a C in another teacher's class. So I think once you get into the secondary and the more discipline-based, content-based classes, it becomes quite a bit more of a challenge to calibrate consistent grading practices.
Any final thoughts from either of you before we wrap up today?
Well, I just think equity is what we all need to strive for, and we're never going to get there entirely. There's always going to be new groups or new new ways that people are impacted. So we need to make sure that we're constantly observant of that, and that we really look at one child at a time. We need to personalize learning to the greatest extent possible for every child. And if we can do that, and reflect on that, then we'll continue moving in the right direction.
Reed, I think that's key, one child at a time. It's a good takeaway.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, and that's what we strive to do here. And it is an ongoing process. And I know we've said that before. I think baby steps, but steps in the right direction. And one thing I think that's helped us is we make it known that, you know, that diversity and equity are priorities of ours. We've made sure that any new educators to our district, you know, those are interview questions now about, you know, equitable practices and how they feel about diversity, because, you know, key is then hiring people with that mindset that fits the culture that we have here. We try to, you know, talk about our practices at job fairs as we recruit new teachers and new administration, and making sure that, you know, everyone on board has that same mindset. We're always reaching out, you know, as far as curriculum for diversity. And I know teachers already have a lot on their plate, you know, trying to teach the standards, but making it a priority where we do have those diversity lessons for our students embedded in our curriculum. I meet with our diversity teams Friday on curriculum for next school year on diversity, and we have, you know, different paths for elementary versus high school and what's appropriate for that age level, and how are we going to embed that into next year. So the learning is ongoing, not only for the staff, but also for our students. So I think, you know, just making it a priority and making sure that everyone in the school district has, you know, that mindset, you know, people who are current and new employees as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Washington. And thank you, Jamie, so much for both of you for being here and sharing your knowledge and learning with us. We really appreciate it. And we hope that our audience is able to take something away from all of this today. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and have a great, wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.